The dust hasn't settled. The cries of loss still echo. But already plans are being drawn for the future of Gaza. Recently, Israel has announced plans to establish a buffer security zone covering more than half of Gaza, a move that could reshape the region's geography and demographics dramatically. This zone aims to restrict Palestinian movement and may serve as a precursor to resettlement and deeper occupation efforts. What lies beneath this seemingly defensive measure? Are we witnessing a strategy of control, a veiled attempt to reshape Gaza's destiny? How will this extensive buffer zone affect the lives of Gaza's residents and the future of Palestinian statehood? And how will the international community respond? Welcome to Think Tank. Hello and welcome. Dr. Hanan Balkhi, the head of the WHO's Eastern Mediterranean Office, urges US Ambassador Mike Huckabee to press Israel's government to allow medicines and aid in Gaza, highlighting the dire humanitarian situation. According to the Times of Israel, aid agencies warn Gaza's humanitarian system is collapsing due to Israel's blockade since early March, restricting essential supplies amid ongoing violence. Israel maintains the blockade linking aid to detainee release negotiations. Defense Minister Israel Katz insists aid will not resume until a civilian mechanism bypassing Hamas is established, sparking controversy over aid delivery plans. The blockade has led to severe shortages in medical supplies, food and fuel, with hospitals overwhelmed and famine looming, exacerbating Gaza's worst humanitarian crisis in 18 months. The Israeli military has resumed ground operations in central and southern Gaza, following deadly airstrikes that killed at least 20 Palestinians a day after over 400 Palestinians died in one of the conflict's deadliest episodes since January. The Business Standard stated that the operations aim to extend Israeli control and create a buffer zone dividing Gaza's north and south. The escalation shattered a ceasefire and triggered protests in Israel amid ongoing detainee concerns. Palestinian casualties have surpassed 49,000, with severe humanitarian crises worsening due to the shortages of essentials. International actors condemned the violence and called for ceasefire restoration, while Israel vowed intensified military action if detainees are not released.
Israel's recent plans to establish a security zone covering over 50% of the Gaza Strip reflect a strategic move tied to settlement expansion, territorial control, and ongoing occupation. Israel has intensified military operations since March 2025, expanding buffer zones and security corridors, notably incorporating the southern city of Rafah and the Mirage corridor. These actions fragment Gaza into isolated sections and significantly reduce the territory accessible to Palestinians. This expansion is officially justified by Israel as a security measure and pressure Hamas to release detainees. However, military analysts and regional observers view these actions as part of a broader strategy to annex large parts of Gaza by creating extensive no-go zones. These zones squeeze the Palestinian population into smaller areas, effectively controlling the enclave's geography and population movement. Now, covering over half of Gaza, the buffer zones are enforced through evacuation orders that have displaced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. This has worsened humanitarian crises with severe shortages of food, medical supplies, and fuel due to the blockade. The move aligns with Israel's long-term settlement and occupation goals. By expanding security zones and annexing land under military pretexts, Israel consolidates control. This weakens Palestinian governance and infrastructure, undermining prospects for a viable Palestinian state and entrenching Israeli dominance over Gaza. Defragmentation, mass displacement, and restricted access to essential services worsen the humanitarian disaster and diminish hopes for peace. Ongoing military pressure and encroachment suggest a shift towards de facto annexation, complicating prospects for a two-state solution.
Salman Marwan with that report there. Now, today on the program, we delve deeper into the underlying settlement and occupation objectives driving Israeli policy, the impact on Gaza's demographic and territorial integrity, and the broader consequences for the future of Palestinian statehood. We'll also examine international reactions, including the United Nations condemnation and calls to end the occupation, shedding light on the geopolitical and humanitarian dimensions of this crisis. We are joined today by Dr. Amani Soliman, who is the director of the Mediterranean Studies Institute at Alexandria University, and from Cairo, Samir Abahra, who's a political, our last guest from Cairo, but from Jenin, we are joined by Samir Abahra, who is a political analyst. So thank you very much, both of you, for being here on the program. Dr. Soliman, let me come to you first. From a political perspective, what do you believe are the primary drivers behind Israel's push for this buffer security zone?
Thanks for having me. The announced is that Israel is trying to put pressure on Hamas to bring back the detainees and also to secure what it has acquired by violence in Gaza. But the real deal, I think, is to stop any kind of possibility of a free Gaza or a two-state solution after the war stops. Look at what they have been doing in the West Bank for decades now. It's the same fragmentation and putting the land into zones that when you think of establishing a Palestinian state, perhaps in 10, 20, or even 30 years, you cannot do anything, just cantoned, separated from one another, unable to be connected, unable to be governed by one authority. I think Israel is not just securing what it has done in Gaza, but it's also securing the future to prohibit any kind of a possibility to establish a Palestinian state.
And Mr. Abahra, coming to you, do you think this security zone is a pretext for a permanent annexation and settlement expansion, just under the guise of security?
Good afternoon to you and to the honorable guest. Yes, I think this is the second phase of the war waged by the IDF on Gaza, and the military troops is entirely different in its strategy than phase one. The first phase had a retaliation intent against Hamas for the 7th of October attack, and for a long month a lot of military operations and strikes that resulted in destruction of all belongings, the buildings and hospitals, and the killing of civilians and targeting Hamas leaders. And in spite of all that, Israel was not able to achieve any of their goals, and there was a political defeat, as they did not and they were not able to destroy all the Hamas military capabilities. The second phase has an ideological and political side, and the nature of this war and the goal of it was the displacement and settlement and dismantling the Hamas movement and isolating the Palestinian cities from one another. We have seen the city of Rafah and Khan Yunis being entirely isolated from central Gaza and establishing buffer zones. The buffer zones on the entire northern borders, and these now are uninhabitable areas. The goal here was for Israel, the announced goal is preserving national security, but it's really about besieging the population and forcing them to leave. The goal here is to destroy the Palestinian identity, the national Palestinian identity. It is the real goal of this war, to isolate all the Palestinian cities so that Israel is able to take control over the entire Gaza Strip and to displace the population, whether forcibly or voluntarily. With these findings, were led to the establishment of the Palestinian state and the connection between Gaza and the West Bank. The goal all along was to cut any connection between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and not the establishment of a Palestinian state made all of these isolated areas would be impossible. Israel also wants to send a message to the world and to the Palestinians that the Palestinian state proposal is now not possible, and the West Bank is not different than Gaza. There are daily strikes on the West Bank, as well as the destruction of different camps and cities. They are cutting connections between different cities in the West Bank as well. And there are buffer zones are being established, hindering the movement of Palestinians. And we can say that the West Bank is also military occupied. Israel is doing all this to cut any possibilities for the establishment of a Palestinian state.
And Dr. Soliman, are there potential regional implications from this plan by Israel? What are the neighboring countries having to say about this?
Well, Rafah was the only gate to the Palestinians before the war and during the war. The movement of the Palestinian individuals from Gaza to the outer world was through the Rafah crossing to Egypt. And even if some say that most of the humanitarian aid would, if allowed, would cross Karm Abu Salim, but still Rafah is very crucial. It was the only way the Palestinians could be connected with the outer world through Egypt. I think the visit of the French president 2 weeks ago to El Arish and how he saw things were stuck there, the humanitarian aid was stuck there, the food, the medications, the tent and everything. I think they want to send a message to the world that whatever you're trying to do, we are not reconnecting the Palestinians to the world by any means. They are just trying to sabotage the Egyptian plan for reconstruction, any kind of aids that the Arab countries are sending to Egypt, aiming to cross the borders to Palestinians. So now, since Israel is dismantling any kind of efforts and trying just to put Rafah as a dead zone, actually, it's not a security zone or a buffer zone. It's just a dead zone with no sign of life. I think they are just tightening more and more the isolation of the Palestinian population. Rafah is almost 20% of the Strip, 20% of the, it used to have 20% of the population, 15%. So now, be it a dead zone, a security zone, a buffer zone, whatever the term is, it means that we are just squeezing the Palestinians in smaller and smaller zone, trying to get the first benefit, which is to topple Hamas, to bring back the detainees, but moreover to kill any hope of helping the Palestinians by the neighboring countries.
And Mr. Abahra, do you agree with Dr. Soliman saying that Israel, amongst other things, is attempting to sabotage Egypt's plan for reconstruction?
In fact, the reconstruction needs a ceasefire and predetermined agreements, and the war needs to end. And in fact, the Gaza crisis now is an international crisis, threatening the world, international peace and security and stability. And last week, the negotiations are not announced yet. There are no responses from Hamas or Israel regarding the negotiations, and it's now unknown anything. The mediators so far are not announcing anything new, which is a real dilemma. This serves as Israeli interests. There are no responses from Hamas regarding the exchange of detainees, which is really serving Israeli interests. Continuing military operations on the West Bank and on Gaza. Gaza wants to take control of Gaza, and there are no solutions offered by anyone. The second point, it is now an international crisis, and we have seen France carrying out a very important role, whether on the European level or the international level. Now Europe is aware that the Palestinian cause needs an immediate settlement, and we have seen Macron when he visited Al Arish city. He pointed out to a few details and he indicated that there must be an immediate solution to the crisis taking place in the region. And therefore we see that Macron stated that France is considering acknowledging the Palestinian state soon, which will open horizons for a solution soon. The Palestinian cause is now witnessing more momentum and is dire need for an immediate intervention on an international level. Otherwise, Israel will permanently kill the Palestinian cause for good.
And Dr. Soliman, do you think that this plan, the so-called security buffer zone, as you call a dead zone, is sustainable in the long term, especially when you consider potential for ongoing resistance and, as Mr. Abahra was alluding to, some international pressure?
Well, at least Israel is planning to. We have seen Israel Katz, the defense minister, saying that even if ceasefire took place, even if the war ended, Israel is not giving up on the corridors or the security zones it has established in Gaza. And we have seen reports saying that the Israeli government was thinking about the same arrangement with even more corridors since Ariel Sharon, since 2004, 2005, before the disengagement plan took place in 2005. So it's not a new vision. And being settled in the Israeli mind for this long time, being implemented now with the declarations of what the statements of what the Israeli minister said today, we can tell that it's a plan to be sustained. At least this is the Israeli plan. Maybe it would be adjusted, it would change a bit here and there, but obviously Israel doesn't want the strip to stay one piece. It doesn't want it to be connected to each other. So this doesn't look like a temporary arrangement or something that they are creating to end any soon, even if the war itself ended. They are making it as a future arrangement that will help them take control of the strip, monitoring what's happening there, even if Hamas maybe will not be in control anymore. They can still control the Strip. There are other 14 or 15 armed factions in the Strip. So they are there putting future plan, and I think they will do their best to sustain it, even with few adjustments. But I think Israel is making arrangements for the future, not just something for the current situation.
Just trying to make this into the new reality for Gaza. And Mr. Bahra, do you foresee, how do you foresee Israel responding to international criticism or any potential legal challenges? Do they even care?
Usually, Israel is not very considerate of the international law or international norms. Israel does not acknowledge such terms, and we have seen it in different instances that when Israel was not very interested in the international law or even given any thought to the Security Council resolutions, orders to withdraw from the West Bank, they never withdrew. And therefore it's protected by the US veto and the US cover, and therefore Israel does not really care what the world thinks. Israel is carrying out its policies regardless of the ICC or the ICJ, and that's Netanyahu now. He has an arrest warrant, and he visited a couple of European countries, and he was not arrested because he has the political cover from the United States, and no country dares to arrest Netanyahu. Israel turned its back to the world and all international conventions. Now Israel has its weapons and the US cover, which is the most prominent behavior by Israel. And there is no international law to affect Israel behaviors. They are carrying out killing the unarmed civilian populations regardless of any international objections. Even the humanitarian aid and relief is now denied in Gaza. And as long as there isn't a pressuring international stance and the international community keeps standing helpless before Israel's behavior, the United States must take action and speak the language of common interests. The interests of the United States and the Middle East must be protected by stability, and stability will not happen except with the establishment of a Palestinian state. This is fully realized by the United States and Israel as well. The United States knows that there will no peace except with the Palestinian independent state. This was stated in the Oslo Accord and in the Madrid Accord. The change came later on with Netanyahu assuming office. He violated the Oslo Accord and all the agreements between the PLO and Israel. He ignored all of that, and no one was able to practice any pressure on him, even the United States, which was in complete harmony with the Netanyahu policies. The Gaza problem now is a natural result of the Netanyahu policies, and that's why we see the current crisis with no future or apparent solution with media for an international intervention.
And what about you, Dr. Soliman? How do you see the role for the international community, especially when it comes to the United States and perhaps the European Union? Is there a difference between the United States and the European Union, or in the end, are they both fully behind whatever Israel decides to do?
Well, we have to separate the EU as an entity from the individual European states that sometimes take a stance different from the EU United stance, because we have seen Spain from the beginning of Ireland from the beginning of the conflict supporting the Palestinians and recognizing the Palestinian state, trying to partially boycott Israel and so. However, we have to remember that Israel is putting the whole conflict in front of the world as the so-called 7th of October attack. They are trying to tell the world that this is only their reaction. The world is forgetting that there is a national struggle that is longer than 75 years now, a stolen land. It's a national liberation cause. So the Americans, especially the current administration, is talking all the time about Israel's right to self-defense. The same goes for Europe, with one difference, which is Europe is still holding to the two-state solution and is trying to put the humanitarian effort ahead. However, the Americans are insisting on protecting Israel, supporting its acts. Even when Donald Trump was talking about Iran, he mentioned the 7th of October, mentioned how Iran is backing Hamas and so on. So is backing Hamas and so on. So the whole story with the United States is that Israel is defending itself, and we are committed to the Israeli security. The Europeans can most of the time condemn Hamas, condemn the attacks. However, they still have a glance of humanity when they talk about humanitarian aid, about stopping the violence against Gaza civilians, and so on. In the end of the day, both are not really taking an action against Israel. Whether they speak about it or not, it doesn't make a difference. They are just trying to, maybe the Europeans put an ethical stance, an ethical voice out there, but with no real action.
Well, thank you very much to both of my guests today, Dr. Amani Soliman and Samia Abahra. Thank you very much to both of you, distinguished guests, for your insights. Thank you very much indeed. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Think Tank, where we always try to unveil the complexities of our changing world. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.